All right, 1, 2. Hello, welcome everybody. How you doing? That's good to hear, So it gives me a huge amount of pleasure to welcome you all to the cinematic world of high contrast and the University of South Wales. I'm David Coker, your chat show host for this fantastic masterclass session. By way of introduction, high contrast journey from a young music enthusiast in Cardiff to an internationally renowned DJ and producer is a testament to his talent, dedication, and innovation. His unique sound, characterized by emotional melodies, complex rhythms, and meticulous production techniques, continues to captivate audiences around the world. As he continues to push the boundaries of drum and bass, his impact on the music industry remains amazing. Today, we have a unique opportunity to explore high contrast creative process direct from his studio. If you have a question or a message for high contrast, you can ask away throughout the session. Don't be shy. If you are here in the audience, you can use the QR code on the wall here and also on the screen. If you're online, use the QR code on your screen or go to Slido using the code #HCMasterclass. Okay, so without further ado, let's dial in high contrast. Just bear with me.
Should I be hearing a ring? Hello, Miami Beach Development Company.
Hello, high contrast, and how are you today?
Oh, hello, David. Right, yeah, I'm in high contrast mode. I'm very well, thank you. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. I'm just going to put you on speaker, okay?
Okay, I'll do the same, yeah.
Okay, hi. Great for you to join us today, Lincoln. What do we have in store to look forward to in this session?
Well, I thought I would run through my kind of current working practice with a mixture of software and hardware, and just my general approach to making tunes. Also, I think it'd be good to touch on doing remixes, as that's a big part of what I do, and obviously in dance music in general, remixes are a big thing. There's a few tracks I've got lined up, some things from my new album, and I can talk about the kind of process behind this album, and how each album I make, I try and have a different kind of concept that kind of guides me in making it.
Right, fantastic. I also do believe you're going to be performing a couple of your tracks. We're going to start off the session with one of your tracks, which is a track we're going to hear, high contrast.
It is Be No Rain, and you can call me high contrast or Lincoln or Link.
I think I'm going to call you Lincoln.
Like.
I can't keep it going any longer, Lincoln. It's going to be Lincoln.
Yes, yeah, there we go.
Okay, so without further ado, do you want to take it away, high contrast? I mean, Lincoln.
was worried about the rain.
Wow, yeah. What an amazing performance. Amazing, Lincoln. Absolutely amazing. Wow. So
Thank you.
I'm going to let you start the masterclass now if you want. And then I've got already getting questions in from all around the world, it seems. So,
Brilliant.
well, I'll interact with you as we go along. So off you go,
Yeah.
Lincoln.
Fantastic. Yeah, because I don't know if the people watching, how knowledgeable they are already about drum and bass production, or if you're just kind of generally interested. But when I was doing that performance, I was using this hardware sampler, the Isla S2400, which is a modern recreation of an old sampler, the SB1200 from the 80s, that was used on a lot of hip hop tracks, like NWA used it, and then the French house producers like Daft Punk were using it in the 90s, and it has a very distinct kind of crunch to it because it's quite lo-fi. Normal recordings are around 16-bit and say 44 kilohertz, whereas this old sampler was 12-bit and 26 kilohertz. And that made it kind of, that lo-fi sound, which at the time, was the height of technology. And then as things move on, it became, kind of passe, and higher fidelity came in. But now here we are all these years later, and there is a real desire for this lo-fi sound again, probably because the digital world is so clean and pristine. So people are trying to get things that sound more textured, and that whole lo-fi thing going on. So I had never used a sampler, in the first kind of 20 years of me producing, even though most of my music is built around samples and sampling. I was just always in the box, in the computer, just making my tracks in the DAW. And
Lincoln, what is a DAW for those who don't know what that is?
Yeah, digital audio workstation. So, a software program like Cubase, that's what I used to use for a long time. Now I use Ableton, Logic Pro, things like that basically allow you to sequence music. So you can record things in, you can load sounds in there, and you can arrange it on the screen in a grid kind of format. And that is really how most dance music gets made, and most music today in general, unless you were like really determined to go the old school route of like recording on tape and using an old kind of 4-track recorder or something like that, which is how music used to be made. Really now everything pretty much is getting recorded into digital audio workstations, and sequenced in much the same way that dance music has for a very long time.
So this decision
dance
to
music has basically taken over. If you listen to the charts, most of it is some kind of dance music now, and it's how things are done and how things sound now.
So this decision to involve a sort of slightly retro hardware kind of instrument is that a step away from the in the box? Is that for you?
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was. I was happy just working in the computer for many years in a very contained way, and then I just kind of hit a point where I was like, I want to try something different and kind of freshen up my approach to making tracks. And so I just slowly started trying different bits of hardware, borrowing some things from friends, and just figuring out what worked for me. And I think often you see like producer studios that are like full of all these racks of hardware and synthesizers. And I mean, it looks good and it's great to have those options, but I think a lot of the time that stuff isn't actually getting used. And so, I have quite a minimalist approach. So I try and use like one thing at a time. So this album that I've just finished, actually, it was built with this sampler as kind of the workhorse. But I'm using it to kind of generate ideas and get a sketch going. But then I'm recording things into Ableton and doing a lot of work in Ableton. Then it's not like I'm not trying to say I'm building entire tracks within this. And I think this kind of sampler is better for making that kind of old school hip hop sound or the kind of filtered house thing. It's harder to do drum and bass as we know it today, which is like quite a technical genre. And I mean, you could use this to make, say, like jungle in a more like raw way, but I try and have the best of both worlds, and so that I've got this kind of the vibe I'm getting from the old sampler, but then I'm also applying all the latest techniques in Ableton and making the most of the latest tech.
Can we go a little bit of a deep dive into that sort of process a little bit? Is that possible?
Yeah, sure. So in Ableton, I've got the Beano Rain project open, and I've normally my projects are a complete mess, but I've tried to organize it for this and label in Ableton. You can see here that there's the bass group, the music group, the drum group, and then the bits and pieces of little samples sprinkled throughout. So if we look at the music group, I've got here, you can see that the original sample was Gil Scott Heron. So I've got like Heron S2400. So those are things that I've recorded in from the sampler, and doing things like cutting it up or arranging it on the sampler and doing some filtering, but then recording it in, so I've got that there as audio and then can process it further. And some of the filtering I'm doing in Ableton as well. So it's just as much as I like the idea of like, no, I'm going to make the stuff entirely with hardware or just on the sampler, it's ultimately too limiting for me anyway. Maybe someone else is cleverer than me and can make full tracks in a hardware sampler, but I find it a little too you're tied down a bit too much, and I'm quite a procrastinator and indecisive, and it can take me years to finish a track. So I like to have the ability to kind of edit things and change them. Let's try playing a bit of this. I'll solo the music group. So you can see that this track, so many of my tracks begin with a sample. I spend a lot of time hunting for samples on old vinyl or trawling the internet. I mean, it's obviously kind of changed the game, you know, what you can access online now. So
Lincoln,
you know, I
Lincoln,
do still have
would
a
you say
kind
that
of vinyl that
samples,
I dig through.
would you say
Sorry, what's
samples
that?
are always your starting point for
Yeah,
a track?
pretty much. I mean, if you listen to almost any other drum and bass producer, and like when I was starting out, I was like reading interviews in magazines with producers to find out how you make drum and bass, and um, pretty much all of them will say the first thing they do is they get the drums going, they get a beat going, and then they'll try and write a bass line and, you know, make that as interesting as possible. And that is how they start. And then it's like, oh, then I might add a vocal on top or a little sample or some atmospherics, a pad, something like that. But everyone seems to start with the drums and bass, and that makes sense because the genre is called drum and bass, you know. But me being a contrarian, I'm not sure I've ever begun a track that way. I always start with a melodic idea, and that's probably why my tracks are generally very musical and you know, strong on melody. And again, part of my thing of like having a contrast to what other people are doing is that I'm almost trying to de-emphasize the drum and bass element while still having it, but really, you know, I want to hit you with the melody, with the emotion, and other people try and hit you with the bass, and I love that. You know, that I'm a drum and bass fan through and through. But for what I do, I kind of think, well, there are people who've like kind of dedicated their lives to making, you know, these crazy bass sounds that will melt your face, and I kind of feel like that there are people who can do that better than me. So what can I do? You know, and I'm kind of naturally drawn to melody and emotive sounds. So that's what I try and bring to the table for drum and bass. So yeah, the sampling is, you know, that is the real passion of mine. You know, I don't really think of myself as a music producer. I think of myself as like an editor of sounds, you know, and sometimes you know, I am writing things, you know, like the piano in If We Ever and little, you know, synth things in tracks, but really I'm not concerned about playing things for my music. I love finding samples, finding kind of lost, forgotten sounds, and you know, trying to create a kind of you know, yeah, it sounds cliche, like, you know, a tapestry of samples. You know, I love finding a vocal from a 60s gospel record and then putting that on some melodic loop I found in a 70s film soundtrack, and then I'm dropping like some 90s sample, some pad sound or something, you know, and just that is fun to me. That is what drew me to producing, you know, being able to kind of play with samples like this more than playing an instrument. You know, I can play the piano, but like in a very, very basic way. You know, you look at If We Ever, it's like, you know, one finger piano playing. So I'm no virtuoso in terms of musicianship. But the sampler I think of as, you know, is my instrument. So yeah, finding the initial sample on Beano Rain, it was, yeah, this. Beano Rain. And you know, I think I've pitched it around slightly to make it work in at the drum and bass tempo, but you know, there are some people who are like, you've got to, you know, make samples unrecognizable, chop them up to 1 million pieces and make it completely your own. And, you know, it's great if you do that, but I often will have the original sample almost intact because I feel like if it's, you know, blowing me away and it's got something magic about it, I kind of want to showcase that in the track. So you know, I have no qualms about like, you know, dropping a massive sample in a tune because, you know, for me, it's about kind of recontextualization, and I'm not trying to make out that I'm like the greatest musician of all time. I'm almost being like a kind of a DJ selector in finding these loops. But then I will kind of go in and see what I can do to the loop and cut it up and try and come with something fresh there. So. So that came about from cutting up the sample on the S2400 sampler and just hitting the pads and finding a new rhythm. One of the key lessons for me when I was starting out was I got to work with a producer called Marcus Intelex, who sadly passed away, but he's one of the all-time great drum and bass producers and a massive influence on me. And this might sound simple, but he was like, you have your A section in a track, but you don't have a full track until you've got a B section, and maybe a third part as well. But that was just kind of a light bulb moment that might sound very obvious, but in a traditional song you have verse, chorus, middle eight, things like that. But in dance music, a lot of the time you're not working in that kind of way. And I generally don't make full songs in the traditional sense. I'm not really interested in that because, again, I feel like the song format has been done and perfected. Say like the Beatles, like am I really going to be able to compete with what they did with that format? So it's not so interesting to me personally to try and write full traditional songs. But this idea of kind of finding sounds and samples and making my own kind of collage of sounds, that is interesting to me. So the idea of like having a main section and then a B section, once you've got even just those two things, you're kind of up and running. But the thing that really glues everything together, and until you have it, you have nothing, and that is the bass line. And it's not that I have particularly complex bass lines. I believe bass lines should be as simple as possible most of the time. But until I've got a bass line, I just kind of feel like the track is just hypothetical. I could have the sample running, I could have a vocal that sounds great, I could have the drums going, but until you crack that thing of what is happening in the bass, it's just like you have nothing, and I think sometimes you can kind of get carried away with a sample or the other things going on in a track, but on a fundamental level, the bass has got to be there, and it has to be interesting in some way. Even if it's just a sub, it's got to be hitting in the right kind of way. And I guess that's something you just learn over time, what works. But the bass line, even though I, maybe I'm contradicting myself as well, which is very likely, but I try and de-emphasize the drum and bass in my drum and bass tracks, but at the same time, I make sure that they are hitting as well. I mean, contradiction is part of life, the universe, and everything. I think and I have to caveat everything I say here. These are things that work for me, and they may well not work for anyone else. Ultimately, I think people have to find their own route into creating things and being an artist. And I can tell you what works for me, but there's no guarantee it will work for other people.
Lincoln,
so,
I've got quite
maybe
a few.
That's not reassuring.
I've got quite a few questions that are coming in already. And I was one of them is really quite interesting because it's related to sampling. And how do you get around the issues of sample clearance and licensing if you are so brazenly using like Gil Scott-Heron, so how does that work for you?
I mean, traditionally, drum and bass, jungle, and dance music in general was the wild west of illegal sampling, and hip hop, of course, originally, where the whole sampling thing kicked off with. And for a long time, you could get away with it because drum and bass and dance music was generally kind of under the radar and not like part of popular music or on the charts or whatever. But yeah, for a number of years now, that is not the case, and people will come and try and threaten you with lawyers or something, understandably. So a lot of people now don't sample, and when I made the Agony and Ecstasy album in 2012, that was the first album I made with no samples, and that was because the record label were like, "You need to stop sampling because this could be causing legal headaches." So I was basically forced not to sample on that album. But then I thought, okay, well, this is actually a challenge here. Can I make an album without sampling? It's not my favorite album, that one, without any samples, but I know some people like it, so hopefully it worked. But yeah, basically today a lot of people don't sample, and I miss that sound. There just is something magical about sampling. So yeah, it makes me a little sad that there aren't so many samples today, and I feel like I'm kind of like flying the flag for sampling to try and keep it going, like an old man shouting at the clouds. But the way I deal with it now is that I will find an old sample from vinyl or whatever, but then I will recreate it, either myself, or there are services out there like Replay Heaven where they will recreate the sample and replay all the elements and track down exactly what instruments were used and find a vocalist that sounds exactly like the sample and record it and present it to you as the sample. But because it's not literally the recording, you can you take a hit on the publishing, and the original writers are kind of part of your record then, but you have the freedom to use that sample. So again, a lot of people don't want to do that because they're taking a hit on the publishing, meaning they're going to get less money from streaming and things like that. But for me, if I love a sample, it's worth it. So like on the track Remind Me, that was originally an Aretha Franklin vocal, and we had that resung, and it means that Aretha Franklin's estate gets 90% of the revenue from that track. And that's like one of my biggest streaming tracks. So to me, it was that or not releasing the track, and it is worth it to me because I love the track. People seem to like it, so I'm just happy for it to be out there, and so I'm cool with kind of taking that hit on the publishing. The other route you can take is going to a website like TrackLib, which is a source for samples. Like they find old records and some new things, and you can sample them, and they've already worked out deals with the artists and writers involved. So it's very easy to sample something from there and have it legal within minutes, of you kind of like filling out the form for that track. So that's a really good route. I use that sometimes, definitely, because that they get access to all kinds of obscure songs from the 60s and 70s, which is generally the kind of stuff I sample. And there's also, of course, things like Splice, which some producers kind of look down upon, but I think it's an incredible resource. And the only problem I have with Splice is just that if you use a vocal from there, well, anyone else can use that vocal as well, and probably already have, because there's only so much on there, and the best things seem to get kind of rinsed. So I mean that is the problem, I think, with Splice. But I mean, if you can find something obscure on there that hasn't been used, then why not? I have a pirate mentality. That is part of what made me fall in love with drum and bass and jungle, is this kind of like semi-legal pirate style approach to making art. And I kind of think all art is ultimately like that. You know, like how many songs did the Beatles rip off, or the Rolling Stones, or the Beach Boys, or it carries on to this day. I mean, the idea of like purity in art, that I'm some kind of lone genius artist who is just making things out of thin air. I, I think that is nonsense as far as I'm aware. Everything comes from something. Nothing is made in a vacuum. And art isn't about purity. It's about ideas, spreading and exchanging. And you do your version on an idea, and then some years later, someone else will do another. It's like I'll even sample things that have already been sampled before, but I'm kind of like trying to pick up the baton and put my spin on it. And generally, if a sample's already been used in drum and bass, I won't use it. But if it's from someone sampled something in a house track or a hip hop track, and then 20 years later, I'm like, actually, I want to put a drum and bass spin on this. That's fair game to me. I have again this pirate mentality. Maybe there's musicians out there who are like, no, you've got to be a kind of a true, pure lone creator, and I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me. I think everything comes from something, and most of the things that I love are you can trace the lines back and see where ideas have come from.
Lincoln, I've got. Can we go back to the track now and maybe
Yeah.
talk about the next step? You've got the sample, you've manipulated it, you've filtered it. The next step, would it be the drums that you'd approach then, or
Yeah,
would it?
yeah. Generally, then I would start on the drums, and you can see here, I've got the drum group, and I don't know how many is that. That's like 12 or so layers of things happening with the drums, and my general approach is to try, like, part of this album was trying to keep things as simple as possible, and it's really just about kind of finding drums that complement the musical idea, so on this track it just felt like a lighter touch to the drums, and a kind of like a wooden rimshot style snare, like that kind of thing. And I've layered that with a little bit of top end sizzle there, and there's another kind of snappy snare that's a bit more in the mid range. But that kind of like wooden drum sound, that is generally across this whole album. I felt like, because I'm using lots of samples, it just felt better to have this more kind of like organic sounding snare than sometimes in drum and bass you have like very hard metallic synthetic sounding drums, which sound heavy and amazing. But with this album, I was trying to go in a different direction and have that more organic, warmer feel to complement the kind of melodic samples. And a lot of the time in building a beat, I am using breaks, so those are like sampled drums from old 70s records that have been kind of sped up, and then maybe from sample CDs or different sources, they kind of pass down through various channels over time. So there's things like that, and then that, and okay, and then some tambourines. Got to have a hi-hat in there, and the kick drum. So I have those kind of like individual hits for the kick drums and the snares and the hi-hats. But if you just had those on their own, it would it would sound pretty. That sounds very stripped down. Now, some people, in current drum and bass, they are going for that very kind of like minimal sound, but I just really like having live drum breaks also in there behind those elements, it just adds this kind of like fullness and sense of like a real recording. Yeah, I just love that kind of sound of having old break beats in there, because it's like, you know, when you've got the recording of a real drummer, you're getting the ambience from the room and the bits of reverb that was happening in that mix, and so that is all there in the tiny like 2-second sample or 1-second sample that you're using. You're getting that kind of air from the room. A sense of that is filtering through into what you're making then. So what I've also done, you know, side chaining is a huge part of drum and bass production, but of course, you know, house and dance music and probably pop music as well, you know. And side chaining is where you have a compressor on, you know, a sound that is being triggered by something. So usually it's the kick drum is hitting and it's causing the compressor to make the main sound duck in volume, so that you have the kick drum, say, coming through, and it's, you know, usually used on the bass. So on the bass group here, what I've got going on, there's a free Ableton plugin called Duck Buddy, which I really like, and it's got a cool little duck graphic on it. But I've got the bass line being side chained to the kick drum, so that the kick and the bass aren't conflicting. And let me see, yeah, so it's just, I don't know if you can even hear it, but it's just causing that little bit of clicking where it's every time the kick drum's hitting. If I bring in the kick drum, and you know, that's just a way of, because the bass is happening in the low frequencies and the kick drum is happening in the low frequencies, they can clash with each other, and so it's a way of creating space. I've also got the bass being sidechained a little bit by the snare as well, which, you know, I don't always do, but sometimes it just lets the snare breathe a bit, and because I generally have the sub bass really loud in a track. But there's it's kind of 3 layers mainly going on with the bass, you know, very simple. So initially, I'll turn off the sidechain so it doesn't pump. But there's, you know, a sub there that I've made using Serum, which is you know, a go-to kind of virtual instrument that used across dance music, and it can make all kinds of sounds. But you know, just for making a simple sub bass, it's very good for that. And then I've added this little erosion plugin in Ableton, which adds just like some top end sizzle, like kind of effectively a kind of a noise on top. But that just, if you've got like a very low sub, it's kind of nice to add just a little something happening in the high frequency. So without it, it's like that. And then, I mean, that is very subtle. I doubt you know, you can hear that, but it is doing something, I swear. And yeah, with the sub, I think I'm just giving it a bit of an EQ boost on the low end, and then I'm clipping it. And clipping is a more polite word for distortion, and that is kind of a big part of how I produce these days. You know, I am clipping almost everything. You know, on individual groups, I'm clipping, and then on the master channel, I'm clipping, and it basically means, you know, there's a whole philosophy of production. If you look on YouTube, there's clip to zero. If you know, search for that, you'll find like 20 hours of the person who invented that, or at least pioneered it. And yeah, just clipping is a way of making things loud. And you know, it would be great if we lived in a world where you didn't have to worry about loudness. And you know, but we have the so-called loudness wars, where you want to make your tracks as loud as possible because other people are doing that, and it's kind of an arms race for like making your music as loud as possible. And traditionally it was like if it came on the radio, you wouldn't want the volume to suddenly drop on your track if someone else has really pushed their track in terms of volume. So yeah, it's it is just a thing really you have to deal with. Either you just say, look, I don't care, my track will be quieter than anyone else's, or you find a way of working with it to make your tracks competitively loud. Traditionally, like years ago, I would use limiters, and that was the way of making things loud. But I don't like limiters so much. I find the sound sounds too distorted, and I haven't used a limiter much at all. You can see on this channel, I've tried using a limiter to see how it sounded, and then I've decided no, I'm going to go with the clipping. And there's the Pro L limiter, which it's a very good limiter, and it does have its uses, but I generally don't use limiters, and I just use clippers to clip things. And you can see when it's running. You can see how it's running into the red there. And if I back the volume off, there's the kind of like normal signal. So like I'm getting about like 10 dB of extra volume there through clipping that, which is a lot. And I think the thing is you have to use it as a creative tool and as a kind of sound design tool. That it's not just that I'm making things louder. It's like it's actually changing the sound and feel of the bass and drums specifically, and it's part of what gives drum and bass, I think, the feel that it has. Sometimes you hear a demo by someone who's just starting out, and it all just feels a bit too gentle, and it's not pushed enough. It's like they've got the drum break there, and they've got the bass, but it's not hitting you, and it's not feeling exciting. And this is the thing about clipping things and making them loud. The loud things do feel more exciting. They do hit you in a different way than if it was a completely undistorted signal. So that is the kind of clincher for me, that I actually like the sound of things when they are being clipped, distorted, saturated, whatever you want to call it. That feels good to me when I'm working on a track and it's hitting that certain way. And it's a very fine thing. You have to find the right balance, and you can easily go too far and just kill the sound and have it too squashed or distorted. So yeah, the other bass elements I have, so there was the sub, and then I've got another serum layer where it's more of a mid-range bass, kind of organy type sound with an LFO wobble, and I just love an LFO wobble. You can see there, so what is happening is you have an LFO generator within Serum, and that has been mapped to the cutoff of the filter and to the volume of the oscillator that is making the sound, and it just gives it that wobbly sound, which I find it hard not to have a wobbly bass line. I just kind of love the energy it gives, and it's like if you take off that wobble, so we have that same sound. It's just, there's still a little bit of wobble there. It's just very flat and just sounds very basic, and it doesn't have the life that you get from a good wobbly bass line. So I use LFOs on a lot of things, especially bass, but even when filtering a sample, it's great to have an LFO on the filter and create something new with the sample. That you create a new groove by having a shape to the filtering. Yeah, and then there's a third layer, which is another kind of organy bass, I think. Yeah, it's just kind of like adding body to because I've got just the pure sub as the main bass. I'm then adding these kind of mid-range sounds to fill out the frequency range. And if you're in a club or a festival, you're going to hear that really low sub that's like hitting at 40 hertz or something. But if you're listening on your phone or a laptop, which is how a lot of people are listening to music, if you just have a pure sub, people aren't going to feel it as much. So having something happening in the mid-range is a good idea. So generally I think a lot of people work like that, where you have a pure sub, so you're hitting people in the club, and then you've got a more mid-range or even higher thing going on with the bass, so it translates to more situations away from a huge sound system.
Great. Can we hear the sort of how the drums and the bass now all fit together? Because I think that, and then maybe introduce the sample so we can sort of see the sort of how it...
So the drum and bass together. And with the sample.
That's deadly, Lincoln's deadly.
Oh, thank you, sir. And then, as I often like to do in the breakdowns of my tracks, I kind of flip it to a different variation of the sample and bring in a hip hop beat as a kind of like nod to my love of sampling and hip hop and just kind of the history of the music. It just kind of feels right to kind of, and the great thing about drum and bass is that, people make it at 174 beats a minute. I make it at 173 because I have to be difficult. But, half time of 174 is 87 BPM, and a lot of hip hop is traditionally at that tempo. I mean, especially the kind of older hip hop that I love. So drum and bass and hip hop have always been connected like that for me. And I've often thought of drum and bass and jungle as the kind of UK equivalent to America's hip hop. And I feel like there's a kinship there. So yeah, the hip hop section, I kind of flip the sample. No, that's the B section. Where's the hip hop? Okay, yeah, here we go. So, I mean, I can load this on the sampler. Let's see if this comes through. Yeah, you should be able to hear that. So there, I've got the hip hop section that I originally figured out on the sampler, and then okay, so there's the samples, and then what have I got? So you can see that it's spread across the pads on the sampler, and it was just a matter of, I think, for the hip hop section, playing it backwards. So there's a delay going on, so it's slowing me down and hitting that in time. But you get the idea there, where I've kind of cut the sample up, spread it across the pads, and just finding a new rhythm.
Do you think that the having the physical hardware in front of you and the tactileness of it, do you think that greatly is, because I'm just watching you do that, and it just sort of, it seems so simple, but but just creating a B section by reversing the order of the chords, you know, does that happen more often when you're using a machine like the?
Yeah, and you know, I have to say, you know, no one needs to buy any fancy gear to make great music, you know, and I was working just in the box, as I say, for 20 years, you know, and a lot of my biggest tunes had no hardware involved in them at all, you know, barely even a MIDI keyboard, you know. So you don't need to do that, and everything I'm doing on here you can do within the DAW, like Ableton, you know, that there are samplers within there. And if you have like a MIDI keyboard hooked up, or even just using the keys on the computer keyboard, you can be triggering samples that way, and you know, cutting up the sample and having it spread across keys. You can do that absolutely within the computer, but there is something to being able to do it on a physical piece of gear, you know, designed for that, and like the feel of the pads, and it just encourages you to work that way. And yes, there is that kind of like extra authentic lo-fi sound you're getting from using a sampler, but I would say almost more than that sonic quality, it is the physical quality that is kind of more important, and how it has guided my whole kind of music creation process for the last few years, since I started using samplers, hardware samplers. It's a way of disrupting um, the the normal flow of things, you know, in the box, in the computer. And the digital world is great, but um, it's almost like we have too much freedom now with you know, making music digitally, because you know, back in the day, you know, there would just be 2 tracks, and then it was a breakthrough when there was a 4-track tape machine that the Beatles had, and then they cobbled together 2 4-track machines to have 8 tracks, and that was like groundbreaking. You know, now with the, you know, digital audio workstations, you can have hundreds upon hundreds of tracks. And artists often talk about you know, that they want to be completely free and not have any limitations, to work without limitations. And I understand that inclination, and that feeling that you know, you don't want your art hindered by any exterior forces. But the brutal reality is that I think people make better art when you have limitations, you know. Of course, you know, there's a cutoff point to that, and nuance to that. But I honestly think that having limitations is very important to any creative process. And you know, the digital world is giving you so much freedom in what you can do. Having a limitation of, you know, working on a physical sampler where there is a limit to the amount of samples you can hold on there, or the amount of sample time you have, and or you know, even just imposing limitations on yourself. You know, as I kind of hinted at earlier, each album I'm making, there's a kind of specific set of limitations that I'm trying to adhere to. And you know, I didn't have to do that on my first few albums because my production was so limited already. You know, I was like the first album I made, that, I mean, it was so basic that you know, I didn't have any kind of synths, or even within the software within Cubase, I couldn't you know, play samples like on a keyboard. So, and I didn't have any virtual synths or anything. So I would get one note of a bass sound that I liked, that I found on the internet, and then I would like manually change the pitch on that in an audio software, and save that as a file, and then pitch it up another note, save that as a different file, you know. And so I had like about 8 of them, and then I would bring that into Cubase and be manually arranging these audio slices at different pitches, to try and write a bass line. Like I couldn't get a MIDI keyboard working because my interface was so basic. So, you know, my first few albums were made in a very limited, basic way. And, you know, to the point where some of my earliest tracks almost couldn't be mastered. You know, I hope this encourages people, you know, that like the mixes were so bad that the mastering engineer was like almost couldn't master it. But thankfully, you know, they were clever enough that they could make them sound good enough to release. But you know, it didn't matter because the ideas were good, you know, and that is what saw me through, you know. And ultimately, still to this day, I think your ideas have to be good. It doesn't matter so much, you know, if your track's not hitting in a certain way. I mean, it depends what you're trying to achieve, but like I still really try and get across to people that it's the ideas, because the technical side you can get better at. You can, you know, learn everything you need. I mean, what took me 4 years to learn, from when I started to learn to produce in 1996 when I was 16, and then, you know, when I was about 20, I got signed and started releasing music professionally. So that was about a 4-year period where I went from knowing nothing to releasing stuff. You know, I think today you could fast track that and do, you know, get to a technical level where you could release something from knowing nothing. You know, you could do that in 6 months, I'm sure, and way beyond, you know, the technical level I had when I was actually releasing music as well. You know, you can, the tools are there with, you know, the programs like Ableton, like, or, you know, even if you're just using the stock plugins that come with something like Ableton, that is more than enough to make professional sounding records. And all the knowledge you need is there probably on YouTube, you know, or follow producers you love on social media, and you know, there's knowledge everywhere. So from the technical side, I think it's very achievable for pretty much anyone. So, you know, I kind of put that aside, and it's really your ideas. What are you bringing to the table that is going to set you apart? And you know, because there is a lot of sameness to music today, you know, and it's a strange paradox where there is more freedom than ever in terms of the technology. You know, you could have an infinite number of tracks. You have all these sounds at your disposal. You use something like Serum, you can make any sound you can think of. But there is a lot of sameness to what people are making, and it's you know, I think culturally there is a broader thing going on where, you know, films are feeling very samey, TV, music, and I think a lot of it is to do with the internet and social media and how it's fried our mind, and the lie of the internet of being this kind of great, you know, freeing up of culture. It's actually resulted in more of a monoculture, and I think people are scared to be different, and there is a lot of conformity now, and people who think differently are kind of shut down. So I think, you know, more than ever, you need to be thinking out of the box when it comes to making music, and trying different things. And, you know, in the long term, I think that makes the most sense, because the people who have the longest careers are the ones who do something different, and are recognizably different, and have their kind of trademark sound that you know it's them. You know, I think you can get so far copying what other people are doing, and I think starting out, it's probably a good idea to copy other people, you know, and you know, literally take a tune you love by a producer and drop it into the software, and just analyze it and break it apart and try and figure out how they did it and try and recreate it, you know. And that is what I was absolutely doing for, you know, the first few years of learning to produce, especially because I was working before there was YouTube or anything like that. And, you know, there were no courses for drum and bass at that time in the 90s, you know. So I was on my own, and just, you know, taking other people's music and analyzing it, and yeah, trying to figure out how they made stuff. That was really, you know, how I cut my teeth as a producer. But there comes a point where you have to go beyond that and find your own sound, you know, and it's something really you kind of stumble into. I think, you know, you can't really plan for that. It just evolves naturally, and the best way to get there is just, you know, how serious are you about being a producer? You know, can you put in the time? You know, I was, from the moment I started Cubase, you know, I was trying to produce pretty much every day, you know, solidly, and still to this day, you know, almost every day I am getting on the computer or on the sampler, and you know, just having fun and trying to generate ideas. I mean, the way I work is to just generate as many ideas as possible and have as much fun as possible, and then, you know, there'll be a day where I'm like, okay, I'll go back through some of the things I've concocted, and is there anything that jumps out at me? It's like, oh, that one actually sounds really cool. I'll work on that and try and develop that into a full track. I never really like go into the studio, which is just my living room, by the way. You know, like I've just decided over the last few years to just, you know, work out of my living room and just minimize things where it's just us, you know, the laptop, a sampler, a couple of little bits, but you know, really trying to take it back to basics and have that limitation of just working with a few tools, you know, and getting to really know them.
Lincoln, I'm going to get.
I'd never go in with a plan. You know, I'm not like business-like about making music. I treat it as fun still to this day. Even if I'm doing a remix for a really famous artist, I have to approach it as just, I'm doing this because I enjoy it. It's just fun to me. You know, if I start to think about it as like work, or, you know, this is money involved or anything, you know, it kills the vibe. So it has to, I think I would try and, you know, get across to people that you need to enjoy what you're doing and have fun with it, you know?
Okay, I'm sort of acutely aware of time. You did a nice segue there into remixing, and I think what I'd like to do now is maybe move on to the Adele track. I think we're going to look at. Is that correct?
Yeah. So this is a remix from, I think, 2008. So this was back when I was using Cubase. So I don't have the original project file, but I've got the stemmed out track here. And you might have noticed that I you know, color code everything as well. Like bass to me is always red. It's just the danger of the sub bass. Drums are generally kind of orange or brown. I'm not sure why. And then FX is often kind of a luminous yellow or something like that. Strings are kind of blue, and piano yellow. I don't know exactly why. It's just you know, I have a bit of that synesthesia where I see sounds as colors in my mind, you know. So certain sounds, if they're powerful enough, they'll trigger these kind of colors in my head, and when I'm making a track, I kind of know if I'm on the right path, if I'm getting like a distinct color hitting me. It's strange to me where, you know, if I speak to people who don't experience that kind of thing, because I kind of feel like I am like experiencing music in an entirely different way to maybe how most people listen to music and the music that I'm making, you know. It sounds good to me. Hopefully it sounds good to you as well, but we might be experiencing it in different ways. You know, it's impossible to tell. But with remixes, you know, I think there's three approaches you can take to a remix, where the first approach is, which is what I usually do, which is you respect the integrity of the original song, and it is identifiably that song, but you've done your version of it. So often I'm remixing tracks that are, you know, not drum and bass. They're from the pop world or house music or whatever. It's I'm taking it and I'm turning that into a drum and bass track and just, you know, trying to put my spin on it. But the big leap is that it is getting drum and bassified. And so I think, you know, but I always try to choose songs that I love the original song. So if I love that original track, I kind of want to have the spirit of the original song there in my remix as well. And often, you know, the original artist and the record label, they probably want the integrity of their song maintained, because ultimately a remix is a promo device for them. It is a way of you know, getting a track to a different audience, and so they want it to be recognizably the original song, which, you know, I understand. The second approach is where you take a smaller part of the original song and almost write an entirely new track to it, but maybe it's got like the vocal hook coming in on the drop, and that's the bit everyone knows. But then you know, you've written a new bass line, and it's doing something, you know, quite different to the original song. Sometimes I'll do that, and often that is what you're getting in drum and bass mixes and dance music mixes in general. The third approach is where you basically throw the original song into a blender, and it is unrecognizable. And, you know, obviously that doesn't get done so much. And generally, I think big pop acts or record labels, they're not going to want their song, you know, mangled like that and unrecognizable. But maybe a cooler, smaller label would be into that, you know. And artists, I mean, the famous story is with Aphex Twin, that he agreed to do a remix for a big pop act, I can't remember who, and he forgot about it, and then they were like on the phone saying, where the hell is this remix? And he hadn't done it, and so he just gave them a random tune that he had made, and that got released as an official remix, even though it had no original part of the song it was supposedly a remix of. But because his music is so kind of way out and mangled, you can get away with it. But yeah, generally, I'm not sure I've ever done that kind of remix where I've like kind of obliterated a track into it so it's unrecognizable. So yeah, anyway, on to Hometown Glory. I'll play a bit of that and run you through the layers. Again, this was 2008, so, you know, my production was probably more basic than it is now. So there's So what I did there was the original strings. You know, the original Hometown Glory track was just Adele's vocal, the piano, and then there were some strings that come in later in the track. And that is great because that is just giving me a blank canvas as a remixer, you know, to put my own spin on it entirely, with especially the drums and bass. And what I did there with the strings was just put a kind of staccato, you know, chopping effect, and you know, just very simple thing, but it immediately became like very recognizable, and it's, you know, a simple studio trick, but, you know, I've heard other producers say, you know, oh, you know, when you did that, I tried to copy that and then put it in my track, you know, and yeah, so sometimes the simplest things can end up being kind of like iconic. And
hometown, memories of phrase from my hometown.
so you can hear there with the recording of Adele's vocal, the piano is still audible underneath. It's like bled through into her microphone when it was recorded. So, you know, that meant I kind of had to include the piano in the track because I didn't have the vocal completely on its own. So that was a little thing that kind of guided me. It's like, okay, well, I need to keep the piano and vocal together in this remix, because I basically have no choice. You know, the other thing with remixes, especially for like major labels and big artists, they want it so fast. You know, I think I had a 2-week window to deliver this mix. And, you know, as someone who like procrastinates a lot and, you know, can take years to finish tracks sometimes, literally, you know, like I think with Remind Me, from when I started that track to finishing it, I think it was about 8 years, you know, obviously not working on it solidly, but it's, yeah, I can take a long time. So doing remixes where a record label are like holding a gun to your head, saying, hey, you have to finish this in 2 weeks. That is a really good way of working. And it's one of the reasons I do so many remixes, because it keeps me productive. Basically, again, putting a limitation on you time-wise, that no, you have to finish it here, and that is that. You can't just endlessly keep tweaking it, as I will without any deadline given to me.
In the city when the air is so thin and low pain. I love it.
So there I added some strings from Massive, which is another VSD instrument, that is ubiquitous in dance music. People don't use it so much anymore, but at that time it was, very popular synth, and still makes great sounds, great for those kind of trancey synth. So I just felt that added a kind of atmosphere and a little bit of a kind of stadium trance kind of vibe to go with this vocal, because the original song is like very kind of intimate and minimal, and I just thought it would be interesting to just try and open it up into this epic track. And one of the ways to do that was obviously adding more kind of those trancey strings, but then give it a really big build-up. And the build-up of this track kind of became a bit of an iconic remix moment, where I cut up the vocal. And you can see there that I just took a section of the vocal and looped it, but then I put this step filter on it that is giving it this kind of choppiness as it's kind of filtering up through the frequencies. And again, I did this remix so fast that you don't have time to think. It was just literally, I've just got to knock this out. And then the first time I played it out when DJing, the reaction was incredible, and and it's then you realize, oh, actually I was really onto something here. And that is one of the joys of kind of being a DJ and producer, that you make music at home, and then you can test it out in front of a live audience at a rave or a festival, and get to see people reacting to your music. And sometimes you're finishing a track in the evening, and export the MP3, drop it into Rekordbox, and then you're off to a gig, and you can play it out hours later and immediately see the response to it. And DJing and production have always kind of gone hand in hand for me, and kind of feed into each other. And you have to be careful, because it's seductive, being a DJ and seeing the reaction that you can get from an audience from certain sounds, from making tunes in a certain way. It can end up with the tail wagging the dog, that it's guiding too much of your production, and you're weaponizing the tunes completely to have this effect on an audience, and that can kill the vibe sometimes for me. I think you can lose your way artistically a bit. So it's a balance to strike there, I think, between making something that, yes, it is dance music, it does work on a loud sound system with an audience, but it still has your personality and your quirks and your kind of unique take on things. I'll just let this play. So you can see there the bass, very simple, again, made in Massive. I've got a sub bass, and then a kind of a distorted top end, doing the same kind of thing. And then the drums, there's, some of those live drum breaks layered up to get that kind of, that organic, lively sound. And then, again, as I'm still working today, where I've got the kind of one-shot kick and snare to give the kind of the body of the drums. And then I think I laid in another drum break Yeah, another old drum break, the Shaka, which just, I mean, if I mute that whilst it's playing, it really loses something. If I take it out and then back in, I don't know. There's just something there, you know, the power of layering, you know, and sometimes I will, you know, be trying hundreds of different drum breaks for to go with a musical idea, and you can start to feel like nothing is fitting exactly right, and then you'll just find one that for some reason jumps out and speaks to you, and you know, that is down to your personal taste, you know, the vibe that you are bringing, these kind of choices, you know. I think you can always, like, you know, put like a heavy kick and snare that you've gotten from Splice or something, you know, that is like, it's guaranteed to sound like a drum and bass track and will smash it sonically, but it doesn't have, I think, so much personality. I think you need to kind of find ways of like layering things and your own kind of unique way of working to give tracks some of your unique flavor, you know.
Lincoln, I'm sort of we're rapidly running out of time. I've got loads and loads of questions from the audience, so can we go through a few of those now?
Yeah, you know, we can keep going from my side as
Oh,
long as you
okay.
like.
Well, if
You may
everyone
have
else is happy,
cut-offs there.
we'll keep going. Yeah. So I've got one question here. It's just like a chef has a knife roll. What are the top 3 must-have plugins you always use or believe are a must for drum and bass producers?
I mean, having a clipper like the standard clip plugin or K-clip is what I often use on the master. I think like having that is kind of essential, you know, for distortion. And something I often do is parallel compression, which is where I have the drum track and then I'm sending that to another channel and processing it separately. And I'll try and open a project to show that. But you know, the basic idea is that on that second channel, the send, you put like some extreme compression. So I often use an 1176 emulated compressor plugin for that, because it has this very pumpy sound. I might have opened a project that doesn't have side compression, parallel compression. Let me. If you have another question, I can open a project and we can
Okay,
get back
here's
to
a
that.
simple one. What studio monitors are you using?
Well, there's a funny story because you know, you might be able to see that I've got one monitor set up here, and this is an old Mackie monitor that I've been using for like 15 years. And, you know, I'm sure there are newer, better monitors you can get, but like the key thing with monitors is that it's really just about what you're used to. And, you know, you spend long enough using any monitor, you start to understand how things should sound on it, you know, and you get used to it. So I'm kind of very reluctant to get a new monitor, but I actually need to, because the second monitor blew up, it broke, and so I've only got one monitor, and I was like, oh, I should get some new monitors. But then I actually was like, you know what, for this album, I've already started like the initial part of making it on one monitor, and I was like, I'm gonna make this whole album on one monitor, so it's effectively mono, and that is another, like, me putting a limitation on myself. Now there is, you know, maybe it's laziness that I, you know, haven't gotten new monitors, but the sense is that like I was used to how it sounded, and so I didn't want to disrupt that in the middle of an album. And then a lot of old hip hop and, you know, even house things were done mono, you know, because a lot of the samplers were mono in the 80s and 90s, and so I wanted to make I wanted to mix the whole album and produce it effectively mono. And then, yeah, I did use headphones at the end of the process to just add a little bit of panning, just a little kind of seasoning on top of the mixes, some stereo seasoning. But the heart of it, the spirit of it, is actually mono. And it, you know, that again, that was like another way of like having some contrast to what is going on, because drum and bass and music in general is very stereo. You know, people really push the stereo width and the stereo image, and it sounds amazing, but you have to be really careful that if you listen to it in mono, a lot of those mixes will collapse, you know, and especially say if you're getting like samples from Splice, a lot of those, like say a snare might sound amazing, but it's really wide stereo. And then if it's in mono, it disappears or sounds really weak. So it can completely mess up your mixes having this like very wide stereo field. So I'm always checking how things sound in mono anyway, because the reality is if your tunes are getting played, you know, if it's on a laptop or headphones, okay, it'll be stereo. But if you're playing it at a club or a festival, you know, is it guaranteed that they have rigged up that sound system to be stereo, true stereo, or is it actually going to be mono? And I know for sure that there are some clubs that, you know, it is basically mono happening on the dance floor. So if your mix suddenly disappears because of phase cancellation, that happens where sometimes when you have something that is too wide in the stereo field and it gets put through a mono path, the tune can disappear. So yeah, be really careful with stereo. And yeah, I mean, monitoring, a lot of people use like the Adam monitors. But it's really just about what your ears get used to, you know, and the best tool is the one you have in front of you, you know. Don't think that like, oh, if only I had, you know, because yeah, with that train of thought, you know, there are monitors that cost £100,000, you know, that are at the fancy mastering suites, you know. So the reality is though that a lot of people are listening to their mixes on an iPhone or on the laptop. Like producers are literally checking how they sound on those because they know that the audience are mainly listening to it through that. So yeah, I mean, get as good a pair of monitors as you can, but don't sweat it too much, and just get used to how it sounds, you know.
Right, I got a great question for you here. It's, hey Link, I was there at Heaven the night that Andy C rewound your Kanye remix.
Oh.
What's the one track you've heard recently which has blown you away like that?
I mean, oh, you're putting me on the spot now, but I suppose like one of my favorite tunes in recent years is Flight FM by Joy Orbison, which isn't a drum and bass track, but I mean, it's just an incredible, just pure dance floor weapon. I've done a bootleg of it actually. That I've been playing out in my DJ sets. So if you're at Boomtown, you know, you would have heard it there. But I mean, the bar is high, I think, for drum and bass production. Like there are so many incredible producers out there. But like, don't let that fact put off people who want to get involved and maybe try getting into production, because everyone starts somewhere. And I mean, the barrier to entry is so low now that, you know, the tools are so readily available. You can get free digital audio workstations. You can get free plugins. The knowledge is there on YouTube. You know, it's so accessible and it just unprecedented compared to like when I started 25 years ago. It's just so much more accessible. But the same thing just holds true. It's just really, how good are your ideas? How much of a vision do you have? You know, what unique spin can you put on things? And you'll only find that through experimenting, through trial and error, just messing around in the studio. That is the way, you know. And sometimes I hear people saying like, oh, you know, I want to study production first, and you know, maybe shadow some people in the studio, and you know, think about what I want to make for a few years. And you know, those are all fine things to do. Like if you can shadow someone in a studio, that's great. But like, if you want to produce, start now, today. Don't wait for the ideal circumstance, because that will never come. There will never be an ideal time, and it can be difficult if you've got a day job, or you're in university, or whatever, finding time. You just have to do that. You have to make time for it if you really want to do it. And like I had friends who wanted to get into production, and then they tried it for a few months, and they were just like, mate, how do you do that? That just moving squares around on a grid all day, listening to the same snare on loop for hours on end. You like, it's driving me up the wall. Like, how, so it's not for everyone, but you're only going to find that out if you have a go. And as I say, the barrier to entry is so low that there's nothing stopping anyone from having a go at music production.
Amazing. I'd just like to point out that we have a BA music producing degree at the University of South Wales. Thanks, Lincoln.
Yeah.
Okay, so I've got 2 more questions for you. Have you ever turned a remix project down, or really struggled with trying to convert a song to drum and bass? That's a really cool question.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have, I've turned down quite a lot of remixes, and sometimes even from really big artists. But it's just that if I'm not connecting with the song, and I don't feel like I can do something that is interesting to me with it, then I'm not just gonna try and knock it out. The one I regret is that I did turn down David Lynch for a remix, which, as a film lover, is I look back and just cringe. But at the time, I was just like, I honestly didn't know what I was going to do with the track, because he's an amazing filmmaker, and he makes this very strange music as well. His film's very strange, and I in hindsight, I regret not remixing David Lynch, as he's one of my favorite directors. But in the moment, it was just I couldn't find a way into the remix.
Right. Well, that's really interesting. We've got one more question, have we? I haven't got it on my screen, Lucy, so you just put it up there for me. That'd be great. Okay. The question is, what kind of tools, VSTs, do you use when you remix a vocal? And this is an interesting part of the question. Have you ever used any of the voice AI tools during your creative process?
Well, I mean, the AI is a whole can of worms there.
Okay, let's not go there.
We could get into if we had more time, but the fact is, I mean, there already are a lot of AI tools in music production, and there have been for many years. Like Isotope. I mean, all kinds of plugins already use AI, but I think the distinction is. There are AI tools, and then generative AI, and generative AI is the one that is kind of the toxic term, because it's literally taking other people's work, and you are essentially able to kind of there's programs where you could take Drake's voice or Adele's voice, and you type in the words you want them to sing, and it's without their permission. So generative AI, I'm not using for making stuff, but if people made like one where artists were signing off on it, then maybe. But I mean, most of the things I've seen with generative AI or heard, it doesn't sound very good to me, and I think it's a bit of a gimmick. But in terms of AI tools, that has opened up a whole new world of sampling, because you can finally do, which was always the pipe dream. Almost as soon as I started sampling as a teenager, I wanted to be able to take a song and be able to split it into stems and get the vocal on its own, get the piano on its own, the strings on its own, and that seemed impossible. But now there are AI tools like what is it called, like lao.ai, and Moises is an app, but it's built into some DAWs even, where you can take a song and it will split it into stems for you, and so you can take the vocals. So if I'm doing a bootleg, then it's great to have that tool to be able to take a vocal out, and yeah, it's just opened up a whole new level of sampling. In terms of vocals, I mean, the one that everyone uses is Soothe, which is like a plugin that makes harsh frequencies softer, and a lot of people are using that on vocals, and I will use it, especially on sampled vocals where maybe it's quite harsh from, you know, if I've sampled it from vinyl, and just to kind of like take the edge off it a little bit. Yeah, Soothe is the one, but you know, often I'm using again an 1176 type compressor to kind of pump the vocal up. Some simple EQing with Pro Q probably. It's different every time. I love the reverb made by Universal Audio, the Capital Chambers. That is an amazing plugin, but that's because I'm going for a vintage vibe, and that is like a 1950s style reverb. If you wanted to make clean pop production, maybe you wouldn't use that, you know. But in terms of the parallel compression that I mentioned, my new single, Remember Me, has got that going on. So you've got the drum track there, and that has got, you know, various EQing and distortion happening, and then it's also being sent to this parallel channel. So you can see there, I've got an 1176 doing like 20 dB of compression. And so that is just being mixed in underneath the main drum group, and it just gives it this oomph and bit of life. Without it, and then if I bring it back in, I mean, it's subtle, but I do that a lot with my drums to just give them that bit of a pump.
Right, amazing. Link, I think what we're going to do, we're going to sort of draw the masterclass section to a close. Thank you so much for your time and all your advice and experiences. But I think I will agree that was pretty damn amazing. And we'll give Link a round of applause in the room, please.
Oh, thank you. Very kind, thank you.
So we're going to close out the proceedings now. We're going to do another performance from Link, if I'm right. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And I'm going to let High Contrast take it away for the final time. Thank you.
I love to see